Hi, folks. Welcome to Walking on the Weene Side, part of It Matters Radio. And today we're going to be talking about finding life on Mars. It's a book, by the way. The author is with me. His name is Jason Diaz. And Jason also is a psychologist, teaches psychology courses. And I found that, Jason, I must admit, your psychology background really comes through in finding life on Mars. Your characters, their personalities, and issues with which they deal. So, why don't you talk a little bit about what kind of personality issue you mostly centered on? Obviously, I'm thinking now of your protagonist narrator, Jane.
First of all, I'm very happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me on the show. All of my books tend to have more of an emotional theme than strictly a character theme. And the emotion that I'm really after here is isolation, loneliness. What's it like to always be around people and yet feel always completely alone?
Yeah, it's almost as if Jane feels that she is not human. In fact, she says that early on. And she, in a way, kind of comes to typify, even though she is not on the autistic spectrum, she does kind of typify that atypical kind of quality.
Yeah, she's unable to see herself in other people.
Yeah.
She's unable to see other people in herself. And really one major arc of the story is her journey in learning to do that.
Yeah, yeah, and she does. But we don't want to do too many spoilers here. So we just got to tell you, folks, she does go on an inward journey that takes her outward, if you will. Which brings up, I have to say, the use of a word that is used a number of times in Finding Life on Mars that I thought was just a unique word, not one that you find very often, and yet a very meaningful one, especially, and we'll get to why it's so meaningful descriptively, but oubliette, from the French.
Yeah. I knew you were going to say that, actually. When you pick out a word, there's a word we need to talk about, and it was going to be oubliette.
Yeah.
I first heard the word in, what's the movie with David Bowie, and he's the Witch King, and the little girl, with the Muppets in
it. Well, I don't think I've seen it, but maybe I have anyway.
No, it's not the Dark Crystal. Oh my goodness. I'm going to be so embarrassed when someone says what it is.
Well,
but it appears in that movie, and that's where I first learned that an oubliette was a sort of dark, inaccessible cell or
dungeon. Yeah, and usually entered through the top, and there's kind of like the gate or the grating above. Which, by the way, have you ever seen an oubliette?
Yes. I think it was called Raglan Castle. I grew up British. In that British countryside, there's this ruin of the castle. There's a couple of walls and a foundation, but the dungeon is intact.
Yes.
There is an oubliette, and it's very frightening.
Yeah, the first time I saw, again in a castle in Europe, the first time I saw one, and I realizing this is not a place that is designed for people to get out of. Mm-hmm. And basically, they weren't allowed out. You'd have to actually lower something down to them for them to climb out. And food was basically what food was given was thrown in, and it's a pretty horrific kind of place. And in a way, the oubliette, there are really, in a sense, three oubliettes in this book. The first is the one inside Jane's mind, where she is really trapped.
Right.
The second one is fascinating. I don't want to talk too much about this giant kind of fungal
Sure.
life form because, again, I want you to read the book. I don't want you to get the plot and say, oh, okay, now I know about the book. I want you to read it. But where the people who are trying to survive end up hiding, and they dig themselves into a kind of a cave. And the third is the one which is really fascinating, that the model you have used for living on Mars is that people have blown their way into the crust of the planet and created basically space, livable space with under, and then they dig down and find places, crevices, if you will, that they can. And so this wonderful French word that is now represents all of these things, which is the approach to the attempt to survive, the attempt to withdraw within, and the attempt to segregate oneself. And now the people, there were two groups of people in your book on Mars. Who are those two types of people?
There's the landers, which is the people who originally colonized from Earth, and then there's their children who are referred to as the true-born children of Mars.
And of course, one of the things I think is very interesting is that they, the true-born, are the ones who are really going into the oubliette, if you will, and trying to become one with. And this, I think, I mean, you never say it, and yet it's there. Of course, we refer to Mother Earth, and they are now dealing with Mother Mars.
Yeah.
And so we have this wonderful attempt to kind of find their way into the womb that is Mars. And was that one of your intents to explore that notion of return to the womb kind of notion, or was that just something that happened to you because you wrote the book well?
I think that's one of the things that you're seeing in the material. Like a Rorschach test, it's an ambiguous stimulus, and you see it there. It doesn't mean it's not there, though.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I love to hear what people put into the work and what they interpret from the work. Often I don't know what a book is about until the reviews start coming in. And you tell me what the book is about. Actually, it's good.
Yeah, I find too, when people interview me about my books, that my understanding grows. Yeah. So why did these landers go to Mars? Because that's a very interesting part of the story too.
Yeah, this story is not a series of stories, but these characters do show up in other stories, and we find out in the book is called What Hope Wrought, and we find out in that book that really the mission to Mars was to sort of mollify a population living on an Earth that they knew was no longer viable. It was never really intended to be a full colony that would succeed. It was meant to be a token effort to make people believe that there was some hope in the future.
Yeah.
When in fact there was no hope in the future. And this leads to Maurice. One of the inciting events in the story is Maurice attempting suicide because the mission that he thought he signed up for, which was to build a base on Mars that eventually other people would come to and live on and thrive, had never been the intention of people on Earth.
Yeah, it had never been the intention of people on Earth, and that's shown too by the fact that it really was ill-equipped. It really was not set up to, and so one of the fascinating kind of fun things to me in the book is that these people are making do. they're out scavenging. And but now you say it is part of an ongoing kind of thought process, and you learn more in other books. But we do learn some of these characters' backgrounds in the in this book, and they are what? How do we learn it? Because it's kind of an interesting.
So Jay accidentally comes up with the idea of the eternal headstone. That perhaps in your former life, when somebody died, they were eulogized, and that eulogy was always temporary. Maybe they had a headstone that was more permanent, and maybe they would have an article in a newspaper, an obituary, that was pretty ephemeral. But if you were to encode this information on radio transmissions and beam those out into space, that those transmissions are effectively permanent. They'll last for the lifetime of the universe. They might not necessarily land on anybody's ears, but they're always there. So each of the main characters in turn gets a chance to say things that they think are important, that should be remembered.
To tell their story. Yeah. And we'll be right back to talk a little bit more about that, but first this message.
Venus is beaming on the face of the sky, but she's got nothing on the light in your eyes. We'll go to Saturn and it crosses your mind. There's no better way to spend my time, and the earth keeps spinning when you try to take it slow. Days will come and go, just like they've done before. But the past and the future, they are easy to forget when we're lying on your bed with the planets overhead. Comets are falling for you out of the blue. The stars are watching everything that you do. I will remember every night in your room, and every time you fly me to the moon. And the earth keeps spinning when we try to take it slow. Days will come and go, just like they've done before. But the past and the future, they are easy to forget when we're lying on your bed with the planets overhead. And I'll turn the key to your heart as long as you want. Love moves along. Time changes everything. Time changes everything. Now that you circle my life faster than light. Like me, one day you'll find your satellite. You will become. Nothing will catch you when you learn how to run. I'll keep chasing you around the sun, and the earth keeps spinning when we try to take it slow. Days will come and go, just like they've done before. But the past and the future, they are easy to forget when we're lying on your bed with the planets overhead.
Welcome back, folks, and we're talking about finding life on Mars. So, Jason, one of the things I wondered about, and in your book, these characters are narrating their stories, and they, for the most part, really sharing some of the difficulty of these last years on Earth. For example, of course, the water levels, sea levels have raised, and cities have become kind of Venice-like, Holland-like, built dams, dikes, and things. And the one around Manhattan gives way, and one of the characters is describing it very, very emotionally fraught, because I thought you brought up this subject of her relative is being supposed to be sworn in as an American citizen that day. And even though this is kind of the end of citizenship, the end of nationalities, the world's coming to an end, everybody's kind of pulling together, but still she's very proud. And there's this symbolic thing that as he is about to be sworn in, the flood. And it really is kind of such a powerful symbol. And I wondered what you were trying to communicate there about nationalism, about internet, about climate, about all these things, because it's such a really loaded for me.
So first of all, I remember the name of the movie, and I do feel silly. It's Labyrinth.
Yes. Oh, yes, Labyrinth. Yes.
Everybody has heard of it.
Oh, yeah, I've seen it, yeah.
And really, I might not consciously have been trying to communicate about nationalism and internationalism. I have some definite ideas about these things, which, of course, are going to bleed through into the writing if I'm not thinking about them. But really, in these scenes, I'm more after some emotion or some experience, right? And in this scene, without giving too much away, I'm really after the idea that you can't do anything to Celine that's worse than what's been done to her before. Mm-hmm. And so she really has a different viewpoint on the situation in which they find themselves, the crisis that's affecting them, the quick motion crisis affecting them, that's distracting them from the slow motion crisis they were always experiencing.
So you saw it from her character point of view, and I was thinking, but also about the author, and it's fascinating to me that you remember the movie Labyrinth, which, as I recall, isn't that set in Spain?
Oh, it's a most of it is in a fantasy world.
Yeah.
And the Witch King adopts a baby, and then the baby's sister, I think, has to go into the fantasy world and retrieve him.
So anyway, yeah, and here you're talking about that kind of labyrinthine emotional involvement, and I'm thinking more about the all these other levels of it. Okay. Now, one of the things I did wonder, okay, and this may just have been kind of a, I don't know, quirkiness on your part,
Sure.
but Jane is narrating. This is a first-person narration. But then you have these characters, the Landers, and they're going to the radio room, and they're sitting there, and they're telling their story, their living, if you will, declaration for all space to know. And yet, you kind of often, you don't tell those in the first person. You kind of mix Jane in with, so that at some points you are hearing, say, Celine telling her story, and then at other points you hear Jane telling Celine's story.
Right.
And I was wondering what your thoughts were about maybe why you did that as an author, or why you did it
Sure.
as a.
This is the only book that I haven't finished and then decided was funny. Right? This book I finished and then decided that I really needed to change the point of view. I wrote it originally in third person, right? And that I decided when it was done that the story wasn't about what I thought it was about. Right? I thought it was about the colony and the experiences of the colonists in the last days on Earth, but it really turned out to be about Jay. Not about everybody, but about Jay. It's a literary, I guess, is the kiss of death. If you say your fiction's literary, then literary fiction, we're following that internal, interior journey of growth or perhaps non-growth. And I really wanted to sink down to Jay's experiences. So I rewrote the thing first person. But then I was left with all of these other narratives that were really very important. And they were very important to Jay's ultimate humanity, that she overhears and even eavesdrops. Initially, she hears them by accident, and then she hears them intentionally. And when I'm writing and when I'm reading, this is what I'm doing too. I'm autistic, and at times I have not felt like a person. But it's in reading piles and piles of fiction. My mother's science fiction collection, Asimov and the Three Golden Acres, and Stephen King and James Herbert, and everyone you can think of.
Mhm.
That I've learned how to sink down into those experiences, because I can't understand face to face. Empathy has been difficult for me to acquire. I have acquired it on the psychotherapists these days, but it's been difficult to do that. And it's in reading these narratives and taking the point of view of people for a long period of time that I've learned about people. And now it's in the creation of these people and putting them in situations, seeing how they react, that I've learned to understand what people are like. And to myself become more like a person. So here's a place where explicitly I have thought about this, where Jay's journey is really mimicking my journey, and I hope that comes across in a way that's authentic and relatable.
Yeah, I was kind of hoping that you would talk about your own, where you are on that spectrum for that very reason that it comes across. And I think you have raised something very important about the reason kids should be encouraged, and adults too, but particularly youngsters, should be encouraged to read fiction, because that is how we learn more about how to understand others and how to. Sorry, folks, for that little technical glitch, but we're back with Jason Diaz now talking about finding life on Mars. And I was just opining a bit there that I think that having kids read books is better than having them watch television or movies, because in books, they really have to think about what the character's experiencing, whereas in television and movies, the action and the pictures and the flashing events kind of take them over, and they don't have to worry about that stuff.
There's a certain amount of empirical evidence for this, that children who watch TV have no change in empathy. Children who read books, literature, actually do experience a change in empathy.
Yeah.
More empathetic.
Spoken like a true educated psychologist. Okay, so now, one of the reasons that all of this changes for the people up there on Mars, and why all of a sudden they are dealing with this idea of, gee, we're going to die, now, yeah, of course we're going to die. Wait a minute, now we're going to die now. Something happens, and I think what happens is very interesting. You create a very interesting device there, and I wanted you to talk a little about that.
Yeah, sure. As we've sort of brought up already, the reason that there's a hole in the ground is that it was blasted out of the ground. And Earth sent a number of nuclear devices for that purpose, sort of as construction tools. One happens to with it. Merlin, one of the main characters, keeps track of it. And when they get a radio signal from Earth saying that someone, the last man on Earth, has access to that device and intends to drop it on, which of course would be a non-survivable event. There's not that much atmosphere on Mars to carry things like nuclear processes of that nature, but there's enough that it extract. So here's another place where I do need something. I'm an existential psychologist. We spend a lot of time thinking about death. Where Freud imagined that it's your anxieties about sex that really drive your psyche, existentialists tend to think it's your anxieties about death that do.
About death.
Well, as long as death was a distant future event, they could ignore it, right? The fluorescent lights are going out, you need to grow corn, eventually there will be no fluorescent lights, no life. They're dim, they've always been dim. I don't think that much about it. But now they're doomed in a much more immediate sense, and they have to take some sort of action, even if that action ultimately is futile. They're compelled to try to defend their lives in any way that they can.
Yeah. So they are responding to this. So before we talk about Eros and Thanatos, let's talk a little bit about this character on Earth, the last man alive. Now, of course, there's a television show, but we're talking about really the last human in a world that is pretty well degraded. I mean, we've already talked about the water taking out Manhattan, and just the quality of life is gone. And now he's there, and he's this last man, and he is aware that these people are up there on Mars, and he says, "I'm going to kill you off." What motivates him? And I know this is like a theme in the book, and I think as an existential psychologist or philosopher, this is a very interesting question to look at. Why does it is important to him to kill these people off before he dies?
This is a story that was lost in taking it from third to first person. In the original version, he actually gets to tell some of his story and really explicate much more clearly what his motivations are. If folks want to go to Patreon and find me on Patreon, they can for free read that first draft with all of its works. Actually, it's not edited. There's some inconsistencies, so they never intended to release it between covers. But that's a place where you can get that story of Sing's character, what exactly motivates him. But ultimately, it comes down to guilt. He wants to have creature comforts. He has every movie ever recorded. And as long as people are alive right now, when he looks at those movies, he remembers that those people are dead. The people in the films are dead. And in other stories, we learn that that's in large part because of his own actions. Mm-hmm. That he's really responsible for some of the things that have happened on Earth and Naked.
So if they die, then he won't feel the guilt.
There are no more reminders that anyone else exists, and he can go back to eating microwave dinners and watching dirty movies, and without the anxiety that because people exist, it means that people don't exist.
Wow. So he can then have this emotional comfort. Is that another reflection, do you think, on the subject of autism?
Ultimately, everything has to be, right? They say that your first novel is at least semi-autobiographical, and I thought I'd gotten that out of the way with the Girlfriend Project, but I hadn't. As much as I reflect on what it means to be a person, all of the characters in the book are necessarily aspects of my own psyche, mulling over these various kinds of experience, right? So here we have Thing on Earth who's sort of an anti-J. J is in her own way looking for connectedness, and she's terrified of connectedness, but she wants it. And then we have Seeing on Earth utterly rejecting any connection. That even the existence of other people is too much connection for him.
His elective autism, if you will, is much more problematic than her felt autism. Yeah. Now,
I hope these things are relatable. In classes, when we get close to this subject, I like to ask students, would you rather get a text from your mom or a call from your mom? And like 2/3 of people would rather get a text. They don't want face-to-face, eye-to-eye contact. I definitely don't want to meet, don't want to hear that voice and get trapped into a conversation there's no way out of. They want to get a text, get the business done, and get on with their lives, even if they love their mother very much. So I like to make this connection that I'm this assertion that I'm more autistic than you are, but you're autistic too.
Yeah, we all in some way.
Yeah.
We all want to build the castle around us. We just don't want to end up in the oubliette.
Absolutely.
So I said,
that keeps these stories relatable, right?
Yes.
But I'm writing from the extreme end of the experience that you all have.
But there is a difference, and one of the differences is that between the what's going on the moon and this last character, and one of the big differences is that he has no future.
Yes.
And one of the ways that we overcome, I think, our guilt, and I think we all, certainly as an existentialist, we all suffer from existential guilt. Every time I eat a piece of bread, it means somebody is not eating a piece of bread. Every time and of course in this day and age with our very real population overload, environmental issues, etc., we certainly have to deal with that sense of existential guilt. But there's also hope, existential hope in the book, and that is in the form of the trueborn, the children. And what is interesting is that Jay has a child. And how did that come about? I'm not asking you how sex works. How does that?
Yeah, I mean, naturally, they didn't plan for there to be children. Everyone who went up was supposed to be told to be of childbearing age, and so they didn't plan on prophylaxis. And when there are children and they reach childbearing age, things sort of take their course. People find comfort in each other, and sort of a Blue Lagoon situation. Then there's children, and they were never planned for, and no one knows what to do, how to handle it. And then we have these issues of speciation, right? Will this third generation of people on Mars be more like their grandparents or more like their parents, and then a tug of war, a relational tug of war, and all sorts of territorial issues.
Yeah. And folks, we're going to be right back after this.
Hi, it's me, Tim Dodd, the Everyday Astronaut. Yes, great news! NASA announced something really exciting today, and no, it's not quite life on Mars for sure at all, but it is a really good sign that we're on track to actually discover life on Mars. So, for those of you that are unaware, NASA launched the Curiosity Mars rover that landed in August of 2012. So it's been exploring Mars for almost 6 years. And actually, it's already found quite a few organic compounds. And organic compounds, they don't always correlate to life, but they're a pretty good sign that we're on track. So we still have to find that direct correlation that these organic materials actually mean life. But it sounds like we're definitely figuring out more and more about our model. So we kind of found two things that NASA announced today that are pretty exciting. Number one, we found that there are billion-year-old organics trapped in the rocks. And this is substantial. They're finding kind of more and more organics than they thought possible. This is methane. This is just kind of all sorts of stuff that could lead to life, and at least shows the signs that there may potentially be life on Mars, or have been life on Mars. And the other thing is we found repeatable measurements of methane in the atmosphere. So previously, Mars rovers and orbiters have seen kind of plumes or random bits of methane, but they were just sudden spikes, and we didn't know how to explain it. And it wasn't repeatable. That's the big scary thing. It's just like, oh, there's some methane. What? And there wasn't really a good system for understanding. Well, now we know that they actually can see it change by the season by a factor of 3 times. So there's peaks and valleys of the background methane. And this is great for our model of Mars. Now that we understand that, we can kind of input more data and hopefully figure out more and more about kind of what makes Mars tick. And this is fantastic for the upcoming Mars 2020 rover, which will have a bigger suite of potential to find life on Mars. It's even more honed in to searching for this stuff than even Curiosity was. Don't forget, we do have another Mars lander, the InSight lander, but that's really to study the geology. It's not really searching for life on Mars. So even though that's headed to Mars right now and will land relatively soon, it's not there to actually find life. But Mars 2020 rover, which, as you may guess by the name, is hopefully going to land on Mars in 2020. And it's on its way. It's basically a brother-sister to Curiosity. It's based on the same platform. We'll just have a different suite of instruments. So that will be great because now they have even more of a baseline on how to study and what to study. And this is great. So, the Curiosity Mars rover made 4 samplings into the Gale crater where it's currently at. And then it heats up that rock to 500 degrees Celsius or 900 degrees Fahrenheit, and it studies it. And that's how it's been doing this basically since day one, using its SAM instrument, which is the sample analysis of Mars. And it's been doing this, but now we finally are just putting a lot of pieces together. And that's what this is all about. I know it probably sounds pretty mundane at this point to some of us that, aren't totally tuned into this stuff like the experts at NASA and JPL. But at the same time, anything that expands our model and continues our we might actually think we're onto something here. And that's huge. And again, there's a reason why we're sending more and more rovers and probes to further study Mars. And this is just exciting news for those upcoming missions. I'm really excited. This is just more proof. And the craziest thing is we aren't even entirely sure still what we found. And that's always exciting as scientists, that they can continue to really dive into there and figure it out. So fingers crossed, this is great news. This is exciting that we're on the right track. Every time we discover stuff like this, it just actually furthers and motivates us to keep exploring. And that's what this is all about. So congrats, hats off to NASA and the team at JPL. You guys are doing fantastic work. Please keep it up. Make sure and follow along. I'll let you guys know if there's anything else that's coming out in the near future. But that's pretty exciting news for now. I'll have a lot of upcoming videos about, stuff like this and lots of other things. So if you want to follow along, make sure you're subscribed here. I do a lot of this kind of stuff and live stream launches and things like that. So be sure and subscribe. Let me know if you guys have any other questions about Curiosity or Mars or rockets or spaceflight in general. That's going to do it for me. Just a quick little update because I'm excited. I hope you guys are excited. This is just another step of we're on the right track. So again, congratulations to the team at NASA and JPL. Keep up the great work. We'll all be cheering for you over here. But that's going to do it for me. I'm Tim Dodd, the Everyday Astronaut, bringing space down to Earth for everyday people.
Welcome back to Walking on the Weene Side. So, Jason, tell me where folks can learn more about you. Do you have a website?
I do have a brand new website. It's called jasondiasauthor.com. That's Dias with an S, D-I-A-S, jasondiasauthor.com. Mm-hmm. If this book is something you might be interested in, it's the short link is amzn.to/2W2QE4.
And that sounded like it was an Amazon link.
It's an Amazon link. So, and just put Jason Dias in an Amazon link and I'll pop up all of them.
Right. So Again, the name of the book, again, folks, is Finding Life on Mars. And Jason, are you also available on the social media?
Sure. My Twitter is Jason Edward Diaz, at Jason Edward Diaz. You can find me on YouTube. Look for Jason Diaz on YouTube. I'll pop up there. Do some poetry and a couple of book reviews, things of that nature. You can find me on Patreon. So a bunch of free stuff on Patreon. I'm on DeviantArt. I'm on Deep Underground Poetry. So I'm all over the place.
Okay.
Jason Diaz on Facebook, author page.
Did you start out writing prose or poetry?
I started with prose. I've been writing seriously since I was 13, which I won't say how long ago is now. Starting with short stories, first novels by 15. They're crap. Nobody can ever see them. They're in an escort. But I started. And fiction really has been my first love. Psychology my second.
So how did you happen to pick up writing poetry?
Sort of by accident. I fell in with an existential crowd in graduate school, and we use. I'm so literal about stuff. Autistic people tend to be very literal. We don't tend to get a lot of shades of meaning or ambiguity. So in graduate school, we're required to do 30 hours of therapy and get a letter from a psychologist saying that we're not going to harm anybody in our practice. And I figured as long as I was going there, I would go see a psychologist who dealt with symbols and symbolic meaning, and try to do some work in that area, and try to grasp all of this symbolic stuff that people were always talking about. So I went to a Jungian analyst, and we talked about dreams all the time, dream symbols and meanings, and then slowly that worked up to writing some poems, and really trying to convey emotions and feeling states that are too complicated to just state in words, right? Like I can tell you I feel sad, but that doesn't really give you the experience of my sadness in the way that writing a sad poem might do. All of my novels really are reflections on these kinds of feeling states. They're much too complicated to convey, even in a poem. But sometimes you just don't have time to write 8,000 words. So you write something smaller and bite-sized that can convey those experiences.
Well, I also write novels, short stories, essays, and poetry. And I find writing poetry does something very different. Yes, partly it's because you start out looking for a metaphor, but I think it's more than that. I think there's something about poetry that maybe connects with a little bit different part of brain processing.
Yeah, you bet.
Which brings up something, just one last little thing about finding life on Mars, which is that, and we don't know how long they will survive. The book ends, and they are still facing relatively short, not immediate, but relatively short-term death. As you said, the fluorescent bulbs are going out in the grow room, and whether they'll find a solution or not, maybe that's another novel. I don't know. Are you going to write a continuation?
I have something in mind, and it's a matter of whether I put it on paper. I don't want to spoil the ending of the book, but if you read the book, of course, read the last page. And you might see where I'm at.
But anyway, one of the questions is not just behaviorally how they identify, but even physiologically. And you kind of talk about this, that they locomote differently.
Sure.
They physically feel differently. They experience time differently, because their days are not the same length. Their year is not the same length. Their gravity is not the same mass. And so, and one of the things I was kind of amused by as I was reading this, I also happen at the same time to be reading a book about history of computers, and like the Egyptians used a base 12 number system, and that's why we have 12 hours of the day, kind of thing, and that kind of that these little remnants continue over time. They persevere through culture. And I was wondering if we were to go, if Jay and her offspring and the other Linda, if they do survive and if they find a way to live on Mars, all the interesting questions as to not only culturally how it will evolve and what remnants will stay and what will go, but also what new changes will occur. And, unfortunately, a lot of science fiction doesn't raise that kind of question. You put humans out there in space in the Starship Enterprise or a TARDIS or whatever you're putting them in, and they don't change. And I think that, by the way, it was just one more reason, folks, why I thought that Finding Life on Mars was a really worthwhile read, because I think Jason Diaz, my guest today, has actually introduced some questions like that I thought, hey, that got me thinking. And when I get a book that makes me feel about the characters as well as thinking about questions and how life works and stuff, then like this book, Finding Life on Mars, well, I just think it's a worthwhile read. So, Jason, thank you so much for sharing your novel with us and for joining me on Walking on the Weene Side.
I'm very happy to be here. Thanks for your generosity with your time.